So, what have we got? Well, the mirror has splashed on the fact that some people have resorted to supergluing and using pliers on their own teeth, as the shortage of NHS dentists reaches really quite troubling depths. There are, it's reported in the front page there, 1.2 million fewer dental appointments available every month on the NHS than there were before the pandemic. And the British Dental Association is blaming chronic government underfunding. Now, Jason, can you take us through this? Can it be right? Dentists have had this reputation for a long time of preferring to do private work. Is it right to blame the government?
Yes, actually, in this instance. I mean, there's two problems here. One is that, I mean, the amount of money the dentists get to run NHS services has fallen by just under 1 billion in the last decade or so. So it's kind of 880 million less than they used to get. And the second problem is the really complicated system for funding NHS dentistry in terms of the British Dental Association say that they get money from the government for each procedure they do, but sometimes they can carry out 5 different procedures but only get one payment for that. So they're just saying it's just not profitable, or they can make a lot more money in the private sector. So they're saying it's not worth a candle. Why should we do it? You know, we're not obliged to do it by law. And that's where it's all gone wrong. Now, the payment system should be rectifiable. I can't see, you know, it's that complicated, it's that bureaucratic, and it's clearly not working as an incentive to encourage people to do more NHS dentistry. It should be fixable.
You'd have thought so, wouldn't you? Now, Amy says, good morning, Amy. He should sort dentist out and waiting lists for NHS appointments. I think the he there probably prefers to either the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, or the Prime Minister. But inside, on page 5, I keep asking you your questions. Have you had any problems finding NHS dentists? Have you got any issues with teeth that you can't afford to get fixed? Because inside on page 5, there's more to this story, and there's some really quite troubling stuff here. So there's a man called Jamie Ellison, who's 49, lives in Huddersfield, and he used pliers on his own teeth after not seeing a dentist for 15 years. There's a part-time nurse in Sussex who couldn't find NHS dentist to remove a broken tooth, so she too tried long-nose pliers, made it worse, and that meant that then she had to find, well, she didn't find, she had to go private, pay 650 quid, and she's still paying it off. And then there's Hannah Whelan from Manchester. She superglued her infected back molars because she couldn't get the money for a root canal and couldn't find an NHS dentist to do it. And she ended up fainting at work from the pain. Maria here in the comments says, my father-in-law used to pull his own teeth out. It looks like it's going to have to be a skill we'll all have to master. It's absolutely disgusting. These are all real people, Jason. We're not making this stuff up. And the reason that teeth get so bad, you are prepared to use pliers on them yourself, is because you don't have annual checkups for years and years. The things get worse and worse. You catch these problems early. But even if you can find an NHS dentist, it's £23.80 for a diagnosis, checkup and advice. That's just to go and see them, and for them to tell you what's wrong is 24 quid. Now, there's lots of people who've suggested, you know, paying to see a GP, but this is what would happen if you have to pay to see a GP. People who can afford 24 quid would go, and people who can't don't, and they get sicker and iller and have real pain and real problems. Lots of people can't afford these prices. So why don't we treat dentists like GPs, where they get paid reasonably via the NHS and they're all free at the point of use?
Small history lesson, Susie, which I'm sure you would like to. It was when they set up the NHS. Nye Bevan, the Labour Health Minister, who was primarily responsible for creating the NHS, he had to go to war with everybody to do this. It was against, you know, massive opposition from the kind of the Tory establishment, but particularly actually from the medical establishment. The BMA were opposed to it. They try to gloss over that now, but it's true. But the one people he could not persuade, and he had the most trouble with, was actually the dentists. So although he was able to create the health service as we know it, he couldn't create a national dentist service. And so we ended up with this slight hybrid system of, although the medical care is free for all at the point of delivery, regardless of your income or background or geography, it was never the case from 1948 onwards with dental care, and this has never been fully resolved. And this is the legacy we had from this. That you know, it's always been this kind of grey area where half of dentistry care is private, and some of it is done on the NHS. But as you say, you still pay. You know, it's never been completely free.
It's never been completely free. And as Phil says there, as a nurse, I will say this will lead to general health problems right throughout the alimentary system because people ignore dental health, they can't afford it. And then quite rightly, Phil said you get infections, you get other problems that affect, then you do have to go to the NHS and the hospital and the doctor.
Yeah, this is such an important point. A friend of mine is a dentist, and he says, who still is an NHS dentist, by the way, and he says one of the key things he does is he says you spot things like mouth cancer. And you know, people don't go to the dentist. They don't. Well, the dentists are most likely to see this, and they're most likely to say, "Look, quickly, you need to get to a GP and then get referred onwards because of this." And so it's not just teeth we're talking about here. It has severe knock-on effects for the whole of the NHS.
Yes, tongue cancer, throat cancer.
Yeah,
so the buccal cavity, which is the palate between your nose and the that's all kinds of problems you can have. Eileen says, my brother pulls his own teeth. He can't get an NHS dentist. I remember once when I was a kid, right, watching an episode of Tom Sawyer in which I think it was, or Huckleberry Finn, whatever, but Tom Sawyer had someone tied a bit of string around one of his teeth, tied the other end of the string to the bedroom door, and then slammed the bedroom door in order to... And it used to be, for centuries, people had to deal with their own tooth problems at home, which is why my grandparents just had all their teeth out in their 20s or 30s, had dentures their entire lives, because it was cheaper to have everything out than it was to have a lifetime.
My grandma's saying, a glass of water by a bed to put the teeth in every night. That's what she used
Imagine
to do.
doing that from your 30s.
Yeah. But I mean, look at these comments, Susie. I mean, this is, you can see how extensive and wide ranging this is from you know, across the country. There's so many people who cannot afford to go to a dentist or cannot get an NHS dentist. And you know, you've got a cost of living crisis anyway. So you know, the people, the incomes have been squeezed because of rising fuel, rising heating, rising food costs. And then, you know, going to a dentist suddenly becomes a luxury, let alone be able to pay for private treatment, which is, as you say, is hundreds and hundreds of pounds.
Yeah. Sarah there's just saying her mum had to go and get some stuff off Amazon to glue her cap back on, which she couldn't get a dentist anywhere. I think my dad lost a cap a little while ago, and even though he went to an NHS dentist to get it fixed, it was hundreds of pounds. And he was wincing about it, and he could afford to pay it. It was still ridiculous. Mark Ratledge says, my teeth are in a mess. I can't get to see a dentist, hence why I pull my own. Mark, you poor devil. How on earth do you cope with the pain? What method do you use? I mean, I can remember a little while ago, I think a year or two ago, Pamela says, it's not just the dentist. Why can't we get an appointment to see our doctors? You can't get past the receptionist. They're sending you to 111 or the hospital. If they're sending you to the hospital, then you probably want to go there because it sounds like they've worked out you've got an emergency. But yeah, sometimes they're saying check with 111 first and see what you can do. Our whole health service does seem to having a bit of a moment, shall we say, after 12 years of Tory rule.
Well, two things here, Susie. One is, I mean, the previous comment sums up the problem, but you know, because the GP services are a creaking point and it's very difficult to get an appointment, and because NHS dentist services are becoming kind of fewer and fewer, like hen's teeth in some places, and people are therefore being referred to 111, who's referring to a hospital, which is putting more pressure on A&E, which is why you're getting these massive waits at A&E. So it's short-termism, it's not working, and it's actually kind of creating more pressure on NHS staff in hospitals who are already working extraordinarily hard under extraordinary conditions. And this is why it needs to be solved. And the other problem is it's political. I mean, it was noticeable that in last week's by-elections, particularly in Tiverton and Honiton, the seat that the Lib Dems won from the Tories, overturning a 25,000 majority, one of the main gripes of the voters, and a justifiable gripe, was the lack of NHS dentistry in the area. And it was also raised on the doorstep in Wakefield, where Labour took the seat back from the Tories. You know, this is something people are concerned about, and it's, you know, it's hurting the government as a result because they failed to deal with it.
Yeah, it's something that matters a lot more than still talking about Brexit or some of these other issues. Leanne, who was just up there, was saying she had 3 kids and hadn't been able to go to see a dentist in 3 years because they'd moved area and haven't been able to see anyone. No one's taking on NHS patients. This is the other problem. You've got people with multiple children and you have to pay every single time to have treatment done. Now, children under a certain age do get free NHS checkups. But of course, you've got to have an NHS dentist in order to do that. And they don't all necessarily, are not all taking on new patients because they're already swamped, the ones that are there. And of course, in the pandemic, they had a rotten time of it and had to cut loads of appointments because they had to leave, the dental rooms, whatever you call them, the fallow for like half an hour before you could get more patients in for fear of passing on COVID. Lizzie says, I had to ring 50 different dentists listed in the NHS website before finding one. Most on there are now private. So a year or 2 ago, Chris, Jason, I can remember our colleague Chris Buckton in the States writing about, I think it was life in sort of Appalachia or somewhere, very poor, very rural part of America. And there was no dental treatment available at all. And people were pulling out their own teeth with pliers, living in incredible pain, even getting addicted to OxyContin to cope with the pain. And they were waiting in this article for like a bus. There was a free bus that came around the communities, but like once every 5-10 years. They couldn't get to everybody. There weren't enough people doing it. And there was a queue round the block to get all these horrible, horrible dental problems assessed and fixed by the dentist. But of course, they were worse than if they got treated to start with. And if the NHS funding model, I suppose, if our funding model isn't fixed, are we at risk of the same thing happening here, where we're relying on a bus going around to poorer communities?
Well, I think we are, aren't we? Because it's going to become a 2-tier system where those who can afford to go private will, and those who can't, we're going to be in pain or rely on some sort of charity. I don't see what the other options are. I mean, if the system's not working as it is, and it's been underfunded, it's got a kind of perverse financial system to actually pay for procedures. I mean, I think that's the way it's going to go. But that's already happening within the health service in terms of medical care. But more people are going private because we've got the longest waiting list for hospital treatment in history, with more than 6.5 million people on them. But the cynic in you goes, well, this is kind of, this is what the Tories do. They wind down or run down the NHS to such an extent that people start going private, and they say, oh, it's not working. Let's move to that system anyway. That's the great fear.
Yeah, of course, this is what we got with the dentist now is what you can expect if they did this thing of having to pay to see a GP first. We'll have exactly the same situation. Lisa says, morning, Lisa. We will see more people ending up in hospital because they have infections in their mouths because they've pulled their own teeth out. Yeah, it's going to be like, people talk about sort of Victorian levels of poverty and Victorian things going wrong. This isn't Victorian. This is medieval. Having to pull your own teeth out is medieval. Beeve says she moved mid-pandemic. No NHS dentist taking new patients. Even the private ones are full, except for the most expensive ones that I can't afford. It does seem like really they have to do what I think, correct me if I'm wrong, what Nye Bevan did with doctors to persuade them was pay them in the NHS what they could have expected to be paid privately so that they could do both kind of thing, or could come and work in the NHS without having a major loss of income. Seems like they've got to do the same sort of thing for dentists, which perhaps would pay for itself in the long run if we're all getting less ill. That would be good. Thank you for Barry as well for your comment about voting Conservative for a strong UK economy. We're happy to put that up, Ivan, and good luck with it. Right, let's go up some of your questions then. Maria says, I have to find £6,000 to sort out my teeth, which I have already been looked after by the dentist for. I can see why people go abroad. £6,000, Maria, good Lord. That's just ridiculous. Susan says, it's costing my son more than £250 for a filling and checkup. He has to go private, no appointments to the end of July. They only work 2 days a week. It's because the other 3 days a week they're doing private work, Susan. Dentists earn better and they have better work-life balance, and they have appointments at times that suit them when they go private. And if we had the option between working for less and working for horrible targets and horrible bosses who didn't want to pay us more, and working all hours, we would all want to go private as well. In fact, most of us do work privately, don't we? Paula says, here in Watford, there are high-rise flats everywhere, and yet we have no extra infrastructure being built, like extra doctors or dentist surgeries to cope with them all, and a 12-hour wait in A&E. The whole medical system is all interconnected, isn't it, Jason? And if it's so underfunded across the board, it's been talked about as being near collapse for a long time, but are we actually getting to that point?
Well, I mean, in parts of the country, it's really quite dire. I mean, I don't know if you've been to an A&E recently, but 5-6 hour waits are the norm. And I could have so much admiration for staff working with them, but it's just people, because they can't get dentist appointments, they can't get GP appointments, they've got nowhere else to go. And all of this means people are getting substandard care, and sometimes they're not getting any care at all. And that's a system which is broken.
Yeah. And Julie says, why is it so difficult to get a face-to-face appointment with a GP these days? It's because there are fewer GPs, Julie. And so they don't have as much time with you. And if you want to go and see a face-to-face appointment, it's going to take longer and they're going to overrun because people go in with multiple problems for a 10-minute appointment and it overruns. And therefore, they want to see you on Zoom because it's quicker. They can get through you quicker. And there's fewer of them to do it. And they can do those kind of things later at night as well and everything else. There are not enough dentists in the system. There's not enough GPs in the system. Not enough people coming through. So, of course, there's fewer appointments. There's fewer appointments for everybody. And I think we're just lucky that we're not having to pay to go and see a doctor. Otherwise, we'd have the same problems we do with dentistry. We'd be carrying out our own heart surgery and knee replacements as well. Wouldn't that be fun? Something to look forward to, perhaps, for 2022 and 2030s and Boris Johnson's third term.